In the bustling corridors of Capitol Hill, journalist Jack Monroe readied his equipment with a palpable sense of anticipation. Known for his sharp tongue and fearless pursuit of the truth, Jack was a star reporter for a prominent liberal news outlet. He had a reputation for holding politicians to account, often leaving no stone unturned in his quest for transparency and accountability. Today, his target was none other than Karoline Leavitt, a rising star in the conservative arena, whose candid rhetoric and steadfast principles had quickly garnered a significant following. Karoline, at just 25, had become a symbol of youthful energy and conservative ideals. Her straightforward approach had won her supporters and detractors in equal measure. Jack was aware of her scheduled appearance at a committee meeting and planned to catch her off guard with questions that he believed would expose inconsistencies in her public statements. As the meeting adjourned, Karoline exited through the large oak doors, her face composed and confident. Jack approached, microphone in hand, and without a formal greeting, launched into his questions. Ms. Leavitt, your recent statements on immigration reform seem to contradict the data from the Department of Homeland Security. How do you justify your position against the proposed reforms, which are supported by extensive research and bipartisan support? Karoline stopped and turned towards Jack, her expression unfazed. She had dealt with the press before and was not intimidated by aggressive tactics. I appreciate your question, she began, her voice steady. However, I believe the data you're referring to doesn't capture the full picture. Let's discuss the real-life implications of these policies, beyond just statistics. Jack, sensing an opportunity, interjected with a follow-up, attempting to steer the conversation towards a more controversial angle. But isn't it true that your stance aligns you with the more extreme elements of your party, potentially alienating moderate voters and... Before Jack could finish, Karoline raised her hand slightly, signaling him to pause. I stand with principles, not merely party lines. It's essential to address the concerns of all Americans, not just those who echo my views. The exchange continued, with Jack firing questions and Karoline parrying each with a composure that belied her years. Unbeknownst to Jack, his aggressive demeanor and pointed questions were not painting him in the best light. Passers-by began to take notice, some shaking their heads at the perceived harshness of his approach. Karoline, seizing a natural break in the barrage, excused herself politely. I must attend to another commitment. I'm happy to continue this conversation at another time. She walked away, leaving Jack with his unanswered questions and a growing sense of frustration. He hadn't managed to corner her as he had hoped. Instead, he was left standing in the corridor, the recorder in his hand feeling heavier than it had before. As he reviewed the footage, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps he had underestimated Karoline. She had handled his assault with a deftness that was both impressive and unsettling. It was clear that if he was going to challenge her effectively, he would need a new strategy. This encounter was just the beginning, and Jack was determined to be better prepared next time. Back at the office, Jack uploaded the footage from his encounter with Karoline Leavitt to his computer. As he edited the clips, trying to frame the narrative in a way that highlighted what he saw as Karoline's evasion and political maneuvering, his editor, Susan, walked over with a furrowed brow. Jack, I saw the raw footage. Are you sure this is the angle you want to pursue? It seems a bit confrontational, Susan remarked, her tone cautious yet pointed. Jack paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. It's what our audience expects, Susan. We corner the big names, expose the flaws in their logic. It's what I do best. Susan nodded, albeit reluctantly. Just make sure it's balanced, Jack. Remember, credibility is as important as the scoop. Later that evening, the segment aired. It opened with a dramatic introduction. Tonight, a liberal reporter standoff with conservative powerhouse Karoline Leavitt. The footage was tightly edited, focusing on Jack's most provocative questions and Karoline's responses, which were clipped to emphasize her defensive postures. The reaction was immediate. Social media erupted, but not in the way Jack had anticipated. While his regular supporters praised the segment, an overwhelming number of viewers criticized his approach. Bullying isn't journalism, one tweet read. gaining thousands of likes. Another commented, "Karoline Leavitt handled herself with dignity under fire. Shame on your network for this ambush." Jack was taken aback by the intensity of the backlash. His phone buzzed continuously with notifications, many from colleagues and peers who felt he had crossed a line from assertive journalism into aggression. That night, Jack found little sleep, his mind replaying the interview over and over. The next morning, with the backlash showing no signs of abating, Susan called Jack into her office. "We need to address this, Jack. The feedback isn't good, and there's talk of issuing an apology to Ms. Leavitt." Jack slumped into a chair across from Susan, his usual confidence dimmed. "An apology? But I was just doing my job." "Your job is to inform and challenge, yes, but also to respect the dignity of your interview subjects. This came off as more of an attack than an interview. We have to consider our reputation," Susan explained, her voice firm yet empathetic. Reluctantly, Jack agreed to draft a statement, clarifying his intentions and expressing regret for any perceived disrespect. The statement would be aired later that day, a move that didn't sit well with him, but which he understood was necessary for damage control. As Jack prepared the statement, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. This incident had exposed a vulnerability in his approach and prompted a reflection on the fine line between aggressive journalism and sensationalism. In the aftermath of the broadcast and the ensuing backlash, Jack found himself in a state of introspection. His career had been built on the foundation of unyielding journalism, often pushing the boundaries to uncover the truth. Yet, the reaction to his interview with Karoline Leavitt suggested that perhaps his approach needed recalibration. During a long, solitary walk through the city park, Jack replayed the interview in his mind. Not the edited version that aired, but the raw, uncut footage. He focused on Karoline's responses, her composure, and the measured way she addressed his questions. He began to see that her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with his aggressive style. It was this imbalance, he realized, that had turned public opinion against him. With this newfound perspective, Jack decided to seek advice from a former mentor, Maria Gonzalez, who had retired from journalism to teach at a local university. Over coffee, Jack laid out the events and his concerns. Maria listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "Jack, the essence of journalism isn't just about challenging the powerful. It's about fairness and integrity. Sometimes that means taking a step back and ensuring you're not becoming the story yourself." Her words struck a chord with Jack. "Do you think I was wrong to push her the way I did?" he asked. "It's not about right or wrong, Jack," Maria replied. "It's about effectiveness. Did your approach give your audience a clearer understanding of Ms. Leavitt's policies, or did it only serve to highlight a conflict? Journalism is as much about the how as it is about the what." Jack nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He realized that in his pursuit of exposing what he saw as the truth, he might have lost sight of how his methods could be perceived as hostile or unfair. Back at the newsroom, Jack decided to initiate a series of internal workshops on journalistic ethics and interviewing techniques. He proposed this to Susan, who was supportive and agreed that it could be a constructive way to address the broader issues raised by the Leavitt interview debacle. As the workshops took shape, Jack engaged with his colleagues in deep discussions about the balance between assertive journalism and respect for their subjects. These discussions were sometimes heated, often challenging, but always enlightening. Through this process, Jack began to refine his approach, aiming for a style that was probing yet respectful, assertive but fair. He understood that his reputation would take time to recover, but he was committed to regaining the trust of his audience. Weeks had passed since the interview aired, and the journalism workshops had become a staple at Jack's news outlet. The sessions sparked vigorous debates and self-reflection among the staff, leading to a subtle but noticeable shift in how they approached their stories. Jack, too, had begun to implement the insights he gained, focusing on a more balanced approach that prioritized clarity and fairness over sensationalism. An opportunity to test his new approach came unexpectedly. Karoline Leavitt was scheduled to speak at a major policy forum about her stance on national security, a topic that had polarized opinions across the political spectrum. Jack's editor assigned him to cover the event, a decision that raised eyebrows given their last encounter. This time, however, Jack was determined to apply his revised interviewing techniques. He spent days preparing, studying Karoline's policies, and formulating questions that were incisive yet impartial. His aim was to facilitate a discussion that would enlighten the audience without becoming confrontational. On the day of the forum, Jack arrived early, his nerves somewhat steadier than before. He watched as Karoline took the stage, addressing the crowd with her usual confidence. When it came time for questions, Jack's hand was one of the first to go up. Karoline recognized him immediately. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, but she nodded for him to proceed. "Mr. Monroe, go ahead." Jack stood, clearing his throat. "Ms. Leavitt, thank you for your insights today. Regarding national security, you advocate for a robust military presence overseas. Could you elaborate on how this stance aligns with your views on fiscal responsibility, especially considering the potential costs involved?" His question, detailed yet devoid of accusatory undertones, allowed Karoline to explain her position without putting her on the defensive. She responded thoughtfully, outlining the economic strategies that would support her security policies. The exchange was a stark contrast to their last. It was a dialogue, not a confrontation, and it resonated well with the audience. After the forum, several attendees approached Jack, commending him on the fairness of his question. Encouraged by the positive feedback, Jack continued to refine his interviewing style, balancing the rigor of journalism with the respect due to his subjects. His reports gained depth, attracting a broader audience who appreciated his unbiased approach. Months later, Jack received an invitation from a prestigious journalism association to speak about ethical interviewing at their annual conference. It was an honor that affirmed his evolution as a journalist. He accepted, eager to share his experiences and insights with others in the field. At the journalism conference, Jack stood behind the podium, the audience filled with seasoned reporters, aspiring journalists, and students eager to learn from experienced professionals. He began his speech by recounting the challenging interaction with Karoline Leavitt that had sparked his journey towards a more ethical approach to journalism. "As journalists, our duty is to inform, engage, and challenge," Jack explained, his voice steady and assured. "However, how we choose to challenge those in power makes a significant difference in the impact of our work. It's not just about making headlines. It's about making a difference." Jack shared the lessons he had learned about the importance of fairness, the need for thorough preparation, and the effectiveness of respectful discourse. He discussed the positive changes at his own news outlet, where the focus had shifted from sensationalism to substance, and how this had led to a restoration of trust with their audience. "Through a series of internal workshops, we have redefined our approach," Jack continued. "We now emphasize empathy as much as we do inquiry. We strive to understand the positions of those we interview, not just to scrutinize them." The speech was well received, with many attendees expressing their appreciation for his candidness and his commitment to ethical journalism. Young reporters approached him afterwards, seeking advice and guidance, which Jack provided with a sense of responsibility. Following the conference, Jack's career continued to evolve. He wrote a series of articles and later a book on ethical journalism, which became a resource for newsrooms nationwide. His approach and techniques were adopted by various educational programs, influencing the next generation of journalists. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt's career also flourished. She became a respected voice in her party, known for her articulate and well-reasoned discourse. One day, she reached out to Jack, inviting him to moderate a panel on media and politics. It was an opportunity to demonstrate how adversaries could come together in the pursuit of constructive dialogue. The panel was a success, exemplifying how respect and professionalism could bridge even the widest of ideological divides. Karoline and Jack found common ground in their mutual respect for the roles they each played in public discourse, recognizing that at the end of the day, both were serving the public interest. As Jack reflected on his journey, he realized the profound impact that one challenging encounter could have on a person's career. It wasn't just about changing his tactics. It was about broadening his perspective and deepening his commitment to his craft. In the twilight of his career, Jack looked back with a sense of fulfillment. The industry had changed, and he had played a part in that transformation. His legacy was not just in the stories he had covered, but in the principles he had championed, leaving a blueprint for others to follow.